Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texas parents about what's going on in our schools. Today, I'm joined by Cassandra Posey. Cassandra is a former public school teacher, a mother of a public school student, and a homeschool mom. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mandy.
Well, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit. You've been out on the road yourself personally, going and educating parents about what parent empowerment means, both for teachers and for kids. And I really want to hear your story about your experience in the classroom first, particularly some of those stories that we're hearing about where teachers really feel disempowered. They can't correct kids, they can't discipline kids, problem children are being sent back into their classrooms. And I just want to hear a little bit about what your experience was when you were in the classroom.
Yeah, so I loved my time in the classroom. I love teaching children. I love watching them grasp concepts that they never thought that they'd be able to. Those are moments that I am so proud of. Unfortunately, there were times that things didn't go as well as I would have liked, and particularly with students and behavior. So, for example, one school that I taught at, I had a troubled young man, and I would send him to the office hoping for discipline, and quite literally, he would come back and I would be told, do not send him again. Do not fill out a form for a write-up for him. We have reached our limit for the year on him and on kids in general. So you just keep him in the classroom, or if you need something, you can call us and we will sit with him.
What were some things that this troubled young man were doing?
Well, he was antagonizing other students. He was preventing them from learning. He himself was very bright, but he needed more stability and structure in his life, especially coming from the area that he lived in. At some point, he was abusive. Actually, I called his parents regularly. I was in communication with them. The school was in communication with them. But at the end of the day, nothing was being done. There were no corrective methods in place, and they were not sending him somewhere else to learn a lesson. It was just, sorry, he's doing this. Sorry, it's a distraction. Sorry, it's, preventing other students from learning. Have fun. And actually, on the very last day of school that year, I got a phone call that he had gotten on the bus and he had brutally beaten a disabled child on the bus that day, which is in itself is horrendous, right? There's not much we can't say. I can't defend any of that. But what I can say is, had we have taken action prior to the end of school, all of those times leading up to that, could that have been prevented? And I'm 100% sure that it would have been.
Yeah. I hear this a lot from teachers who talk about the fact that they're not being backed up by the administration with being able to discipline students, this corrective or I should say restorative justice, quite frankly, nonsense that came out of the Obama administration saying we can't actually discipline children and teach them, right? Because they're learning, they're young and their brains are forming and they're learning social norms. And if we don't teach them the consequences, then obviously we know we hear all the time about that school to prison pipeline.
Right.
So, well, I'm sorry to hear that experience, and I'm cautiously optimistic that legislators, leaders, and the parents and teachers of Texas that are a part of the parent empowerment movement are working together to say this applies to parents who are seeking out an alternative with an education savings account, but also those that are selecting their public schools that they're assigned to. Students, that it's not fair, it's not right for every other student in class that child was disciplining or disrupting them and not receiving discipline. So let's talk a little bit about what you also saw in terms of children that were being advanced. This is on just my thoughts right now, because we just saw that yet again the A through F rating has been challenged. It's been sued. Districts are not wanting to disclose to families how kids are doing. I mean, that's what it is, right? And so talk to us a little bit about what you saw as a teacher, and quite frankly, how this impacts students when parents don't necessarily understand where their child truly is and what they're able to do.
Right. So in regards to the A through F rating and the lawsuits, one of the things that I am telling trustees across the state, those that I know personally, those that I don't, is, but do you offer after school late buses? Do you offer after school tutoring? Some do, and that's great. But I know of some that do not. And now they're challenging these ratings when their schools and their students are failing to even meet those grades. So instead of spending that money on a lawsuit, why don't we try to improve our outcomes instead?
Yeah.
Let's fix that problem instead of trying to mask it somewhere else. But I have seen, unfortunately, a lot of students just kind of get passed through the system. One in particular that I can recall, she was 13 and she could not read. I have a 6-year-old at home who is learning to read, and she can read better than this student could. And it was heartbreaking. And I wanted to help her. And I was not her reading teacher, but I wanted to help her, and I wanted to do anything I could, because I did not understand how anybody could get her to this level and not be putting in the time and the effort with her. And so I sought out other teachers and her ELA teacher to ask, like, what can we do? Where can we fix this? And I was told, we can't. She's already skipped a grade, or I'm sorry, been held back a grade. And so there's really nothing else that we can do for her. She's just going to get passed through the system. And I thought, what future does that have for her? She can't even read. She can't read her prescriptions. You know, she can't read the signs on maybe where to park, or for how long you can park there, or where to pay that toll, you know? And so it becomes an unfortunate cycle. In that same school district, I actually sat to proctor or administer the STAR exam for the high school students, and I was shocked when we sat in a room and I saw students just all the way down. And when I'm not talking 1 or 2, I'm talking large amounts of them, and then turn it in. They didn't care because they didn't have a reason to care. There was no need for them because they already knew where they were in the system. And unfortunately, it was a prison town, and a lot of the families were there because their families.
Oh, there was literally a prison
there. Was
there.
literally a prison there, right. And so they are just getting caught up in this literal cycle.
Generational, just
of public to
failure
pipeline.
to reach your potential.
Yes.
And just the expectation, that's interesting. There really is, for far too many kids, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And it's not just within the system, but that begins to go into their psyche and how they see themselves and the expectations of themselves, which is just devastating for young, vibrant minds, kids that have all the potential in the world to just be effectively told, you can't do it, so we're not going to teach you.
Right.
That goes to when we talk about the parent empowerment movement, the second pillar is quality. Every child deserves a quality education of where they're going to school, or what they're learning in school, I should say, and the school that they're in. And it's just devastating that these are the 50% of kids that when we say they can't read, they really cannot read.
Right.
And we know that if a kid cannot read by the 3rd grade, which is roughly 9 years old, if a child cannot read by then, there is a 97% guarantee that they will never catch up. And you unfortunately had to see those students. Well, that's just devastating to see that. So, which kind of takes me into when you talk about what the children were doing because they already knew, and that soft bigotry of low expectations, and they knew where they were. It it takes me into what we're seeing in a lot of our classrooms across Texas. Quite frankly, I can't open my phone and not receive a text message from a parent in public schools or even trustees in our public school system that are sharing with me a lot of these culture wars that are going on, particularly the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we all know is just divisiveness, racism that's being taught. But you had a experience with that with your own son that is in the public school system, and that really opened your eyes. Can you share a little bit about that experience that you saw in his classroom and in his schoolwork?
Yeah, so I have always been a very hands-on parent. I have always been involved in his education. I was a single mom for a long time, and really just doing my best to break him out of the generational cycles that I had even been caught up in, coming from also a low socioeconomic area and a minority. And so I've always held high expectations for him, and I have always made it a point to be on him all the time. What are you doing? What do you need to be doing? You know, steering him into how to be an adult, essentially.
That's our jobs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one day, he came home with all of his materials, and I said, well, what did you do today? And he laid this book out for me with, his short answer assessment that he had written. And in it, he spoke about white people being an issue or a problem. And I was shocked because that is not something that we ever condone in our home of any race. Like that is just not how we operate in our home. And so we started reading through the book, and it was all of these instances of really just racism, just back and forth. And the only white child ended up always kind of being the scapegoat. Like it was always his fault, or there was always a problem with him.
In the passages?
In the passages, yes. And he was always seen as different from everybody else. And even at the very end of the book, they had questions to answer. The book has questions to answer, right? And it says like, well, why do you think this kid was treated differently? Yep. Or, why is this kid not like the other kids? And so that was a big problem for us. And that was just one instance in that class. There was another where they had to watch a Nike commercial about, and I think it was kind of considered a BLM Nike commercial. And it just blew my mind, the questioning that they were having to answer with this commercial. And then I never received any of that work home. Now, my son is a stellar student, and I'm watching his grades like a hawk. He needs to do his work, right? And when I saw a grade that was not like the others, I said, this is not normal. Let's look into this more. What assignment was this? Where is it? How do we learn from this? What did you do that we could do better next time? And he said he didn't have the assignment. And I said, okay, well, go get it. Ask the teacher for it. Well, the teacher doesn't have it. Well, she should have it, And so at that point, I'm emailing. And I said, I would like to see this assignment. She says, well, it's in his book that he should have. It's not in that book. So now can you tell me where it's at? Oh, well, it should be. I don't know why it's not. And it was just the back and forth. And eventually I had to escalate it to the principal. Where is this assignment? Like, where is it?
That is the first pillar of parent empowerment for all parents. Transparency. We all just want to know what our child is learning and why they're learning it.
Yeah, I want to help him be better.
Right.
Help me help him.
I think it's important also because we have listeners. Some people aren't watching this. You're Hispanic.
Yes.
Your son's Hispanic.
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to make sure that when we talk about this, that we understand that this is a huge problem, the divisiveness that is going on.
I come from migrant farm workers.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to make sure. And you were a single mom. Doing it on your own. And we talk about this all the time because the impetus for starting this podcast was because I oftentimes walk away with the tears of so many mothers on my shoulder when I'm out meeting moms, many of them single moms, many of them minority mothers. And it is devastating to hear their stories, how they can't see what their kids learning, like you're talking about, or they're not respected. And we know that the love that we feel for our children, that transcends race,
Right.
that transcends income, that transcends marital status.
Mm-hmm.
That love that we feel, that is just deep down in every parent. Until you felt it, you can't explain it.
Nope.
I say it's like a lightning strike. And I just wanted to make sure that our viewers and listeners know that you were, at that time, this mother that oftentimes people kind of want to strong arm, ignore, disrespect, not be transparent, and that this is the story that you're sharing. So
Right.
please continue kind of about, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this happens to parents of every race
Right.
and socioeconomic status.
Yes, absolutely. So I went back and forth with the principal at that time. She took the notebook. She took possession of the notebook that this assignment was supposed to be in, and she confirmed it's not there. And my son had actually overheard the teacher saying, I am shredding all of their work.
That
And
that worksheet.
yeah. Anything else she had left, she shredded. And I said, she better not have had your name on it. Like, as a former educator, there's nothing that should have been private. There should have been no private information in that paper that meant that it could not, one, come home, or two, leave the campus. Like, there was no social security number on it. There was no private information.
Right.
So why could I not see it? And they couldn't answer that question, right? They don't know why she did the things that she did. And we were fortunate in that we did file a grievance, but we were fortunate in that situation that she chose not to come back the following year. But what had happened? What happened is she just picked up her stuff and moved somewhere else to do that to other children and other families. And that is heartbreaking.
Let's be clear about what she was doing. I like to say the quiet parts out loud. She was indoctrinating children
Yes.
with racism.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no doubt, because otherwise, why can I not see it?
Right.
Why is there a need to shred it?
Right.
Why does this notebook have to stay at school and he's not supposed to bring it home?
Right. And I want to make sure, because that is obviously not the majority of teachers in Texas. No. The majority of teachers want the exact same things that you and I want. It is transparency in the classroom, high quality education, respect for parents and teachers, and choices for them.
Yes.
But if we don't talk about the rogue teachers and administrators that are allowing these things into our classrooms, and are allowing to perpetuate it, not the librarians that are, pushing the really, really inappropriate, highly sexualized materials. So thank you. And that's what I wanted to talk about, because we know that this happens and we're hearing this. We've got reports out of school districts where they're separating kids by their hair color, by their skin color. I've got parents in other districts that are talking to me about privilege walks, right? Where that you're telling kids to stand on a baseline of the basketball court or the football field.
Right.
And they're saying, take 2 steps forward if your parents are married. Take 2 steps forward if you live in a house or an apartment. I mean, it goes in line with what you were just talking about. And that really does create this mentality of separation. Instead of, if you really want inclusivity, we are Texans. We are Americans.
We are better together.
That's right. We are together. We are unified. And it really does go back to why that those that are involved in the parent empowerment mission say that this is the civil rights issue of our time, is because when we look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his words on the steps of the mall in front of 250,000 people, 25% that were white, he said, I have a dream that one day my 4 children will live in a country where they are judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And somehow, for some reason, we have so much of this really pernicious and divisive materials that are coming into our classrooms. And we have got to fight back and say no more. Well, thank you kind of for sharing that story about what you saw and how you kind of fought back and that you went through the grievance process. And I'm glad that she wasn't teaching your son anymore. I hope that she learned a lesson that parents are, better equipped to push back, and that parents absolutely do deserve the first and foremost transparency into what our children are learning and why they're learning it. So thank you for sharing that. So that takes me down to another story of a mother that you met while that you were really advocating for education savings accounts, but also for empowering parents. Because again, your son is still in public school, and you met a woman that came to an event recently at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we just decided to call an audible, if you will, and ask her if she'd come up on stage, because as she was walking in, I greeted her and her son. She is a single African-American mother of an 11-year-old boy. So she told me that the next day school was going to start, and she said she wasn't looking forward to it. And then she said she was scared to send her child to school. Can you talk a little bit about this mother that you met and who she herself has really become active in empowering parents with transparency, quality, respect, and choice, because her only child, that little 11-year-old boy, that she said, I'm scared to send him to school?
Yeah, so like you said earlier, your phone is always ringing with people calling to tell you stories. And mine is exactly the same. I'm always getting phone calls from people. I'm always hearing stories, or I'm getting emails, or someone saying you should talk to somebody else. They have something, you should hear. When I come to Austin, I'm bringing their stories with me. Not everybody can afford to come up here, right? They have to work. They have to take care of their families. They have to take care of their parents, or whatever the case may be. And so when I have the ability to, I bring their stories with me to help advocate for them. She is one of those mothers, and she is phenomenal. She is a phenomenal mother and just a great person in general. But she herself was having problems with the transparencies in the school. They were not being transparent with her. Safety issues, bullying, and just being able to have curriculum that she felt aligned to her beliefs and her standards. And I'm not saying even in a religious perspective. I'm just saying, like, flat line. This is the baseline where we should all be. Why are we moving the needle left or right? Yeah. But she has become a fierce advocate in her part of Texas, talking to parents all the time. Came up on your stage, no questions asked. You said, do you want to? And she said, if it's going to help.
That's right.
Yes, yeah. I will do it, whatever it is. And when she comes to Austin, she's knocking on doors with me. And the first time I met her here, I had already known her through, texts and phone calls. But the first time I met her here, she said, what do we do now? And I said, you go and you advocate for yourself and your child. That's what you do.
That's it.
And she said, well, how do I do that? And I said, I'm going to teach you the same way somebody else taught me. You are no better than them, and they are no better than you. And so you need to march in there and tell them your stories. And she does. Every time. That's right. She gets a chance.
And she told a story about the bullying that her son has experienced. And there's another mother that just actually filmed with, and I've filmed with her because she had sent me an email talking about her son that was bullied to the point of attempting suicide. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that, because it's a culture of silence, we don't want to talk about these parents. And it's important to note that bullying is a major problem. And that is a component that one of the many reasons why parents deserve choices.
Right.
Is, look, there are incredible public schools all across Texas, and there are incredible administrators that they ensure that their school does not allow bullying, that they are not facilitating inappropriate behavior. But there are also far too many that turn a blind eye or that say there's nothing we can do about it
Right.
or whatnot. And that's really, those parents oftentimes are the ones that I walk away weeping with them, because I just dropped my middle child off at kindergarten, and I felt so blessed to be able to, like, I get emotional even talking about it right now because they grow up so fast. And I was blessed because I sent her off into a school, into an environment with people that I trust with my life and theirs.
Yes.
Because they are my life. And I thought about the mother, Shanera, who said, I'm scared to send my child to school. And when I dropped her off, I was in tears because I thought, this is hard enough. I cannot imagine the parents who are sending their children to an environment where they've been bullied, where they are being bullied, where they're creating suicidal ideations or even attempting that. And
Right.
and that really is part of the parent empowerment movement, that sometimes just because you live on a street and you're zoned for a specific school, that does not make that the right environment
Right.
for your child. And sometimes it's not necessarily to a fault of the school districts. There's a lot that we have to change in our culture.
Yeah, it's definitely a cultural aspect that has to shift. And I taught at a phenomenal school district, rated top of its class, one in the top 25 of the state. And I remember, as we're talking about this, I had a young girl, probably 14, come to me during my passing period, my planning period, and she was just crying her eyes out. And I had never seen a teenage girl cry like this. I mean, we're talking like full body emotions, like somebody had just died. And she was sitting at my desk, and I was like, what is happening? What is going on? And she said, they've made memes about me, and they're putting this on Snapchat. And, and it was, she was explaining that it was like they were putting on images before AI, of her topless and things like that. Yes. And she was mortified, rightfully so.
Right.
Right. And this had been going on. This had been a long line of like silent bullying until it got to that point and she couldn't take any more. Right. And at that point I was like, this is enough. We need to go to the counselor. Like, this situation has to fix itself. And then soon after that, she got transferred into my class because she kind of felt like, okay, I know if I'm here, this is safe. This is the safe zone.
Right.
And no one's going to treat me that way here. But it is, I think about it like this. When our kids get their ID cards that are required, right, at the public school, that they have to wear, when you flip it over, what does it say? Suicide hotline. If you feel this way, call this number. Why can we have the conversation on a card that our kids wear every day, but we're not willing to have that conversation openly? Why are we not talking about what is driving them to these points and how do we rescue them from that before it even gets there?
Yeah. That brings up a great point. And I've had several mothers come on the podcast. And in fact, one mother who is a professor at Dell Medical School, UT Austin's Dell Medical School, in the Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences Department. And we talked a little bit on camera about technology and what is leading so many of these kids, just the explosion of depression and anxiety. And thankfully, we are seeing more ISDs, more legislators that are pushing back and working to get these, to get technology out of the classroom and get smartphones in particular out of the classroom. It's really, really important to talk about this and talk about how they got into the classroom in the first place, and that this is a battle of the parent empowerment movement to say, Mom and Dad, you can fight back. You can support your school boards. You can support your administrators. Get this stuff not only out of the classroom, but quite frankly, get your kids off these apps.
Right.
Get your kids off these social media platforms where they are being exposed to bullying, but also just totally unrealistic expectations of what you look like or what you've accomplished or whatever, because it is so so detrimental in their developing years. This is
Right.
kind of, again, it all goes together. Parents being able to fight back against that stuff that's in the classroom.
Yeah, and I'll say my husband, bless him, he and I together, we are on every committee our school district offers, so we are particularly busy most of the time.
Yes.
But one of the things that I did this year on our SHAC committee was I said, hey, let's bring in an organization that will tell parents about these apps. Let's put it out there. Let's talk to parents about it so that they know what to look for and the downfalls of having them. And I will say, I talk about my son all the time and how great he is and all the wonderful things he does. None of it matters if he's not a good person. And these apps are not helping children be good people. And he has none of them.
Yeah.
Like we don't.
Good for you.
We don't have. He doesn't have time to do that.
I mean, I just want to fist pump you. And I feel like
thanks.
all the moms out there are probably like, good job. And
And it's hard, right? It's a lot easier to say, here's a tablet or here's an app or whatever the case might be. But is it so much easier to do that than burying your child later? Like, it's really not.
It's not. I mean, it's not. And that's it, is we hear from parents all the time, particularly parents who have kids in middle and high school who say exactly what you say. It's so hard. But thankfully, so many parents, I think, now realize what, quite frankly, a decade ago, they didn't know how detrimental even just, handing their kid the iPad or allowing them to get on the Snapchat, which, by the way, does Snapchat still does it still allow them to, it erases material, right? Isn't that what it does?
Allegedly.
Okay.
Allegedly, it erases
I remember
material.
when it kind of came about, I don't have it, but it was one of those things that you can do it and erase it. And I remember, this was before technology, I'm not going to totally age myself, but I remember when I was in school, we would write notes, right? You would write notes, and I can remember in
fold them up real nice, tuck them in.
Yes. There was fancy ways to fold the paper. Yes, that's exactly right. And I remember writing a note about a boy that I had a crush on and, how cute he was and whatever. And that note made its way into another person's hand, and then everybody knew. And I was so mortified. It was so embarrassing. And I cried. And I can just remember crying to my mom. And so she taught me, she said, if there's anything that you don't want people to know, don't put it in writing.
Right.
Like, if you don't put it in writing. And that was like lesson number 1. And then number 2 that I take away now is, you know what? That note is long gone. And this stuff that's going on on technology,
right?
The just kind of nefarious nature of what are you putting on there? The Snapchat, particularly the photos that you don't want people to see, but then also so much of it, like it's there forever.
Forever.
That little girl who cried to you about the memes, that
still lives on somewhere. Yeah, it's on someone's phone somewhere. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it's on an Instagram, from forever ago, buried deep down somewhere. But it still exists.
It still exists.
And I think, as parents, we are also kind of learning how to navigate all of this.
Yeah.
We didn't know some of the studies that we do now, right? Like, hey, your kids probably shouldn't be on a tablet, prior to a certain age or spend X amount of time on a screen because it leads to behavioral issues. Well, we didn't know.
Yeah, I read somewhere recently that there has been since the introduction of smartphones, the iPhone, that ADHD has increased diagnoses by 60%.
Wow.
Because it's a prefrontal cortex issue and regulation issue. And whether we're diagnosing more, I mean, it's just a whole host of problems for families. And yeah, I think that more and more parents are waking up and realizing no. And that means we have to push back on the school system and say, get this out. Because obviously during the COVID shutdowns, everybody received technology. And we're handing it to kindergartners, for goodness sake. That's crazy. But I'm going to tell you, these technology companies and their lobbyists at the Capitol, they're going to keep fighting.
Right.
They're going to keep fighting to have it in there. So that's another reason why parents have got to stand up lock arms. That is what the parent empowerment movement is about. It's about taking back control of our kids' lives and saying, yeah, if you want that in your kids' classroom at a certain age, when it's age appropriate in the introduction, then absolutely. But kindergartners being handed iPads,
well, yeah,
give me a break.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
Yeah, and that is something that I ask a lot. Again, with all of the committees in the school district, I belong to those too, and it is the question that I've asked is, we know now, we know better now,
right?
So why aren't we doing better now?
That's right.
And I don't ever really get an answer to that.
Yeah.
And that is frustrating. But my power as a parent is, one, to say something, to be a part of this committee. And as much as I don't want to be there, from 6 to 8 p.m. or, go to all of these meetings or be on Zoom calls, that is a right that I have. And that's power that I have. Yeah. So, one, we can do that. But two, we should be able, whenever our voice is not enough, to remove our students and say, that's not right for my child. I'm going to take them somewhere else, right? And a lot of people will say, well, you already can. You already can do that. Well, sure, if you can afford it. But I know so many parents who cannot, that is actually the only option that they have. And even though they don't like it, and even though they're part of a committee where they say, this is not okay for my child, they don't have another option. It's not feasible for them.
Back when you were a single mother before you met your wonderful husband, who also advocates for parents, could you have afforded to remove your kids from school?
No.
Yeah.
No way. No. So I have 4, as you mentioned, and every year I'm like, can we send them to private school? Can we afford that? What is the monthly cost? How could we make that work? And the answer is always no. No, it's not. So we're just going to keep homeschooling and paying out of our pocket for all of these things that we still can't even really afford, just to do the best that we can.
Right.
But no, I mean, even when I was teaching in that school district that had the prison in it, my son went to the charter school. Mm-hmm. And there were days where he would get out early, and it was literally across the street.
Yeah.
And there were days he would get out early and admin was like, it's fine. He can, there's only an hour left. He can sit in your classroom. And he would be answering questions that kids twice his age had no clue about.
Wow.
And it was then that I said, I had never been in teaching before. I did not go to school for teaching. And when I saw that, I said, something is not right here. Mm-hmm. One, yes, I'm an active parent.
Right.
Some of these kids had active parents too. They
didn't know. There's not transparency, right?
They don't know. And if we're not sending homework home,
that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Then the parents really don't know.
Right.
And so how can we set expectations as educators? How do we set expectations on parents when they don't know and we're not providing anything for them? And I spoke to a reporter once, and he said, well, as a former educator, do you support ESAs? And I said, yeah. Most of us do. Because if in your heart of hearts, and I still have a lot of educator friends, if in your heart of hearts, you are there for students first, then you want them to succeed no matter how. I don't care if it's in my classroom or it's in your classroom or if it's at the school down the road. Like, I'm in it for the kids and for their future and for the generations that will come after them. So yeah, why wouldn't we want that?
That's beautiful. That's very well said. Thank you. And that's exactly right. And that is, I received those comments from so many teachers as well who have that same philosophy, because you go into teaching because you love kids.
Right.
Most people do.
Right.
Unless you're the woman that stood on stage recently who said, I went into it because it's the best use for social justice. And I was like, oh, my goodness. Thank goodness you're not a Texas teacher. So you hit on something that I want to talk about. You are a homeschool parent. Your 3 daughters.
Yes.
And you support education savings accounts, and you would like access to education savings accounts. Please talk about that, because I think sometimes you've got a really loud small number of people who have, as I call myself, a healthy distrust of government, which I have as well. And they're have concerns, which I am constantly telling them, I totally understand. That's why this is opt-in.
Right.
No one is going to force you to participate in receiving an education savings account. But talk about why, as a homeschool parent, what this would mean to you and your daughters.
Right. So to be clear, I have an older son who is in public school. Loves it, thrives.
Yep.
He's doing great.
Yeah.
I have a younger daughter who I homeschool, and I have another younger daughter who has just started a charter school online.
Wow.
Which is an interesting hybrid of homeschool and public school, right? Because we are participating with a class, but everything she's doing is with me. And then we are, uploading things together and learning these lessons together. I'm kind of putting in all the filler, if you will, which has been great for her, because for her, that is absolutely what she needs, because homeschool was not working for her. And then I have a younger one who is in the pre-K stages of homeschool. My older daughter who homeschools now, that was not always the goal, right? To be honest with you, the goal was kindergarten is not mandatory in the state of Texas. It's not. And I am home, and I know that I can facilitate an education because people used to pay me to do it, right? And so that's what I was going to do until it was time for her to go to school. And when that time came, it was not the best situation for her. There were things that I didn't particularly like about how they were going to go about her education. And this is, specific to her. And that was okay, because I had this option to homeschool her because, like I said, I was already staying at home and doing it. So there are a lot of disadvantages to homeschooling, so many pluses. I love it. I love the amount of time I get with my kids, even if, with 4 of them, they drive you a little crazy. But I love having control over how much they take in and about what things. One day she said, "Hey, what is that in the sky?" And I said, "Oh, it's a hang glider." And she said, "Well, what is that?" And I said, "Well, let's sit down and talk about it." And we watched some YouTube videos, and we read a book online, and we did all of these things. And now it's like she can just tell you everything about the different facets of hang gliding.
The physics of it.
At 6. Yeah. And
great.
Sometimes I'm just shocked. She talks to us, and she's like, "Did you know?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm good. I'm doing a good job," because I didn't.
Those are the best
I didn't
moments,
know that.
Right? I love that. That's awesome. When they can teach you something.
Yes. But for her in particular, because I cannot stress this to you enough, every child is different. And I'm gonna hone in on this a little bit. As an educator at this top-rated school district, one of the things that we were required to do was our grading period was 9 weeks. Every 9 weeks, you had a different grading period. And for each one, you had to have a major grade. And in that major grade, you had to change it. So the first 9 weeks, it might be writing. And the second 9 weeks, it might be a component of art. And in the third 9 weeks, it might be something on the computer. You change the method every time, right? And when I said, "Well, why do we do that?" They said, "Well, because every student learns differently. We have to differentiate the learning for them." And then by the time we got to the fourth 9 weeks, it was, "Here's a bingo card. You can pick and do however you want because that's how you excel." This is not new. This is not a new concept. We should be incorporating this into our public schools every day, every grading period, but we're not. But it is the same in homeschool. I look at my kids and I say, she learns differently. That's why one is doing the charter and one's at the public school, and one needs a box curriculum. She just does. She does not thrive on, let me grab this from here and let me grab that from there. She needs structure. She needs it to flow. She has a lot of needs. And that costs money. A box set of curriculum, get it on discount at the homeschool convention, right? Then you still got to get a payment plan, because normal people cannot afford
shell it out
to spend $1,500 in curriculum for one student for one grade.
Right.
And that's just that. Like, that doesn't include
tutoring.
Oh, yes.
Right.
She had an issue with
therapy.
Yep. She had an issue with reading and speech, right? Well, now I have to pay somebody to do those things.
Right.
And She was taking speech at the local school district, and they were great with her. They were doing wonderful things, and they called me just the other day, and they said, so now that you're not sending her to school, she's, she goes on this proportionate share and all of these specific things to education. And they said, we don't have anyone to facilitate that this year. So just wait. Somebody will call you.
So you can't even take her in for that because she's not enrolled full time, because that's
right.
And this is why education savings accounts are so important.
Yes.
And quite frankly, the public school system could say, even if your daughter is not thriving in the environment, they could be paid to offer that for her with an education savings account if they wanted to.
Yes. And so one of the things that they told me was, well, we may find somebody that we contract with and then you can do online, or we may just pay you to send her somewhere else.
Oh, yes. I know all of, yes.
Well, then why not?
Yes.
Why not just have a savings account for her?
You're not supposed to talk about how they actually do send children out of district to day schools and things like that.
Which is huge.
It is.
Especially in the special education they don't want to talk about. All of that.
But it's also just another reason why the special education community and the homeschool community overwhelmingly support empowering parents with education savings accounts.
And then you want to talk about, well, we have this, this stipend for special ed students. It's a one-time $1,500. Great. Love it. You can only get it if you are enrolled in a public school.
That's right.
So that doesn't do me any good.
Right.
Well,
which that was some tricky shenanigans at the last minute of passing that piece of legislation, because that's exactly right. There are so many families who it is better for their child to be in a homeschool environment. But of course, there's always people in the legislature. Many of them have left or
are on their way out.
Unfortunately, some of them go on to become lobbyists who try and lobby against this. But
or they do that while they're
in. Right. I did see that. Sometimes people are, bragging about their lobbyist who's on the dais, which is a whole other discussion.
Yes.
Thank you for sitting here and just kind of talking about your experience as a mother with all the different choices that you're making and why you support empowering parents with school choice. And thank you for talking about some of the hardships that kids are feeling in our public schools where a different environment with an education savings account would be important. You are such a leader among mothers and for teachers. And so thank you for sharing how you have learned to advocate both for your kids and for other kids. Can you look in that camera right there and tell the moms and dads of Texas what they can do to advocate for their children and why you are fighting to empower parents?
I'm fighting to empower parents so that your voices can be heard, because it's your children who matter and you are their voice, not somebody else. And if you want to get involved in advocating for your children, all you have to do is call your representative.
Thank you, Cassandra, for sharing all the amazing work that you are doing for parents, for your kids. Thank you for shining a light on some of the quiet parts of the culture so that we can fix it. Thank you all for joining us on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.